Your Excellency, President Nazarbayev, Mr. Chairperson in Office, Minister Sadabayev, Mr. Secretary General of OSCE, Mr. Brinshambo, distinguished heads of state and government, honorable ministers, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. President Nazarbayev, thank you for your warm welcome and hospitality. I applaud your leadership to organize this historic OSCE Summit meeting in Astana. As the first CIS and Central Asian country to head the OSCE, Kazakhstan is helping to guide the way to a new era of action and engagement. Excellencies, I'm honored to participate in this historic first OSCE Summit in more than a decade. The United Nations and the OSCE are founded on core principles and common values. We share the conviction that security is not a narrow concept. We must address the challenge in all its dimensions. We must take a comprehensive approach. That wider perspective has never been more valid and necessary in our increasingly globalized, complex, and connected world. Today, I want to speak briefly on how we can deepen our work to expand peace, advance human rights, generate sustainable development, and build a safer world. The moment is ripe for action in all four areas. First, securing peace. In Kyrgyzstan this year, we have shown that we can do together. The United Nations, the OSCE, the European Union, the CSTO, and others joined forces to provide timely and coherent support to the people of Kyrgyzstan at a critical moment. Our cooperation was further enhanced by your close coordination with the UN country team and the UN Regional Center for Preventive Diplomacy. In Afghanistan, we face another test. We will need to collaborate closely to ensure that the transition process is sustainable and irreversible. This will mean making a long-term commitment to capacity and institution building. The United Nations would welcome greater OSCE involvement in supporting Afghan national programs and priorities. For our part, we are planning to launch a regional program for action, a regional program for Afghanistan and neighboring countries early next year. It will foster cross-border cooperation to counter 21st century transnational threats of drug trafficking and organized crime. The OSCE region itself is also home to several protracted conflicts that urgently need a peaceful, negotiated solution. All people, including those living in disputed areas, rightly look to us for assistance. As a regional actor, the OSCE is in the lead, but you can continue counting on the United Nations as a reliable partner. In taking on all of these challenges, we must do more to engage youth and women for peace and security. Yesterday, here in Astana, I met with an extraordinary group of regional women leaders who are committed to this effort. In this 10th anniversary of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security, let us illuminate an essential truth. Women lead to peace. Excellencies, that brings me to the second collective challenge, advancing fundamental freedoms and human rights. The OSCE is a lead actor in promoting and supporting the conduct of free and fair elections. We have partnered very effectively in this field. Let us now turn to enhancing our cooperation in the broader area of democracy building. As we all know, credible elections are an essential element of democracy, but not a guarantee of good governance. let us redouble our efforts to assist countries in ensuring the primacy of the rule of law and equal access to justice, broad citizens' participation, and other hallmarks of inclusive, democratic, and societies. Of course, we cannot talk about democracy without also focusing on human rights. In the past two decades, we have seen how intolerance and violence of human rights, particularly those directed against minorities and other marginalized groups, have led even to violent conflicts. The OSCE, unfortunately, sometimes sees violations of its own commitments in this area. Full implementation of OSCE values, principles, and commitments is needed to effectively protect human rights and promote inclusive societies. More effective peer review could help, as well as full accountability to its own citizens. Upholding the rights of asylum seekers, refugees, and migrants is especially urgent. I reiterate my call for your greater engagement with the United Nations independent human rights mechanisms, in particular with independent experts of the Human Rights Council focusing on thematic mandates. I urge you to respond positively to their request for country visits and to implement their recommendations, as well as those of the UN Human Rights Treaty bodies and universal periodic reviews. On all of these issues, we will continue our close cooperation with the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, the representative of freedom of media, as well as High Commissioner on National Minorities. Excellencies, distinguished heads of state and government, our work to achieve the Millennium Development Goals provides the foundation for progress on the third challenge, sustainable development. At the recent G20 summit in Seoul, there was a shared appreciation of the importance of the MDGs and a shared willingness to work with and through the United Nations to achieve all of our global development objectives. The Seoul Development Consensus for Shared Growth, adopted by the G20 summit, includes an action plan that relies heavily on the United Nations leadership and expertise and reinforces the action agenda adopted at the MDG summit in September in New York. I count on the OSCE's support in implementing this important agenda. We must also reinforce our efforts to address climate change. In just a few days, leaders will gather in Mexico to spur further steps and progress in the negotiations. We do not expect a comprehensive agreement, but many issues are ripe for agreement, including deforestation and adaptation to technology, finance, and capacity building. Environment-friendly management of water and energy resources is increasingly imperative also in the OSCE area. The tragic fate of the Aral Sea must prompt us to act to prevent similar man-made disasters and indeed security risks elsewhere. Excellencies, fourth and finally, let us advance on our common efforts in arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation. The international community has achieved progress in the field of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation, including the successful conclusion of the NPT Review Conference in May at the United Nations. However, significant challenges remain. I'm grateful for the engagement of OSCE member states. I'm particularly encouraged with ongoing cooperation on the implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1540 on the non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. The Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty is critical to non-proliferation. I have repeatedly called for bold action by all countries, especially those whose ratification is required for the treaty to enter into force. Earlier this year, I had the honor of visiting the former nuclear testing grounds in Semipalatinsk. Thanks to the extraordinary and visionary leadership of President Nazarbayev of Kazakhstan, Semipalatinsk has been transformed from a place of dread to a symbol of hope. What was once a ground zero is today the epicenter of the Central Asia nuclear weapons free zone. This is a model for other regions to follow. The same vision and commitment to shape a better world that made it possible to close Semipalatinsk now summons us as we look to the great challenges and opportunities of our times. As we continue, let us also strengthen our work on conventional arms, transparency, and confidence and security building measures. Distinguished heads of state and government, excellencies, this is an ambitious agenda, but I'm confident that we can achieve it together. My hope comes from you and all I have seen throughout the OSCE region. Not so long ago, few would have imagined the people of this vast area would be bound so closely together. In the process, the challenges have become more apparent, but so, too, have the impressive common achievements and enormous new horizons of change and opportunity. Your review under the Corfu process testifies to your commitment to build an ever-evolving and effective set of instruments, approaches, and architecture to respond. The United Nations stands with you as we seek to make this world a safer, more just, and more prosperous place for all. Thank you very much for your leadership. Thank you.